Pod. Thank you so much for welcoming me home each and every week when I listen to you guys. My name is Dr. Amber Brown, and I have a question. I know that Donald Trump is constantly putting out these executive orders that are very harmful and very impactful in a negative way towards minorities, especially brown and black communities. And so I think just recently he decided to stop letting federal agencies celebrate Black History Month. And my question is, why are Black Americans just allowing this to happen? Why can't we stand up and say, no, this is not what we're going to do? Stop giving our money to companies and organizations and platforms that do not care about us. When that happens, I feel like they can be defeated and show that, no, you can't do this to us. Why are we allowing this? Do you have any thoughts? Thanks.
Y'all, so Amber's question is really hitting on what a lot of folks in our community are talking about right now. We've had conversations in my household. I'm sure y'all have with family and other friends around, how do we continue to give our money away to corporations who at this time are backing away from us and doing so in such a public way? As you all know, and we talked about in the rundown, some of the more patronized brands by our community are looking like they are betraying us. And it's hitting very, very close to home. I'll start with the fact that Target just recently announced that they were ending their DEI work, their emphasis on recruiting more minority-led businesses into their profile. We'll talk more about that, but I just wanted to quickly mention some of the companies who have joined Target in stepping back from our community and supporting diversity. Amazon, Walmart, Meta, McDonald's, Ford, Harley Davidson, Lowe's, John Deere, Tractor Supply, Brown Foreman, and the list actually is continuing to grow. I think part of the good news is, y'all, is that the list of companies who are saying they are sticking with us is also growing. Some of those are Apple, Costco, Ben and Jerry's, EIF, Beauty, JP Morgan. And again, that list is continuing to grow. But folks, man, this is RJ and I were having a conversation about the Target piece because it's one of the first places we were able to go to find Black History Month shirts that fit our kids, that they could wear to school and felt real proud about it. And we also, of course, as y'all know, have friends who are on the merchandising side. In fact, why don't we just, before we get into our conversation, just quickly throw to just one of those examples of vendors, Black vendors, who are part of Target's national portfolio.
Yeah, this is Melissa Butler. She's the owner of the Lit Bar, which is carried in Target. Let's take a listen.
I've seen a lot of people this is why we need our own Target, or this is why we need our own Walmart, which is true. But do you know why we don't have our own Target? Do you know why we don't have our own Walmart? Because we barely shop Black brands. We're constantly competing to tell people to shop the Lit Bar over Charlotte Tilbury, or the Lit Bar over MAC, or the Lit Bar over NYX or ELF, or et cetera, et cetera. So the reason why we don't have these powerhouse brands is because our support is finicky. In 2020, when it was cool to shop Black-owned businesses, we all got an inflated sense of support for about 3 months. And then by the end of the year, we had all this extra inventory. Some people had hired a bunch of people, and guess what? It wasn't cool to shop Black anymore. But again, the reason why we don't have the control that y'all want us to have is because we are not keeping our dollars within our community in the first place. So now when somebody decides that they don't want to support our community, we're all up in arms. Well, we've created this.
So that's one perspective, y'all. I'm curious to know, ladies, how are you all thinking about some of the upcoming, I think, boycotts that are pretty well predictable? Reverend Al Sharpton has announced, along with his committee, that there'll be a strategic list of companies that will be first targeted. No pun intended. And then there's been an announcement that February 1st, would be the start of a nationwide boycott of Target. I'm curious to know how you all feel about that, especially in the context of these business owners.
I I was so grateful to our friend Reverend Mark Thompson. In our feed, we have a Black media feed, and he said, and I don't think I'm out of line. We normally don't share out of here, but this is a synopsis he gave us from the letter from the Birmingham jail, which we know is from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He said that there are 4 steps that you take in a direct action against any entity. And the first is the collection of the evidence, which I think that we mostly have. These companies have come out now and have said where they are rescinding, where they are retracting. I do think it's important that we distinguish Amazon, and we can talk about that today or another time. 2, negotiation, which normally are your list of demands. I have not seen a list of any clear demands. The third is spiritual purification. As you all know, Dr. King had a commitment to nonviolent resistance. Some people believe in something else, but there is that. And then the fourth is direct action, which are your protests, your boycotts, etc. Now, what I think is important in this day and age is I think we've gotten very comfortable with our ability to blow things up. And I don't mean in a literal sense, I mean in a figurative sense. We can say, like, we're going to take this person, that we're canceling this person, this brand is canceled, blah, blah, but we don't have no type of strategic plan. Reverend Al has talked about them doing a 90-day review and then selecting 2 companies from that. There are more than 2 companies that are basically assaulting our community, trying to take our money, but not respect us, not honor us. And I think that we do need to be in conversation with the vendors at these brands to figure out what does support look like for them if these boycotts are indeed going to happen. What we should not do is subject our friends, our family, brands that we care about to friendly fire, because people are going to be real hot about if they can't get Boss Lady no more. They're going to be real hot about if they can't get something from Tabitha, whether it's her book or some product she has in Target. And I think that we are at a time, a very critical juncture, where when we make enough noise, when we make our demands clear, and we are on one accord about it, there is a response. And I'll give you an example that's very timely right now. Yesterday, the night before, the Trump administration put out a memo from the Office of Management and Budget, which is what I talked about on the live show yesterday, which was essentially a federal funding freeze. Today, as a result of the uproar, as a result of the clear information we gathered, as a result of our requirements about what our expectations are as taxpayers of the federal government, that federal funding freeze has been rescinded. It's been rescinded. A judge stopped them yesterday, but today, just now, breaking news while we're recording, it's been rescinded. Stuff happens when we move. Things change when we stand together. And so I would implore us to figure out what our demands look like in this very critical time, not just of brands, not just of entities, nonprofits, et cetera, but also of this administration and also of the Congress, particularly those representatives who are aligned with our beliefs. If we stand on one accord, I believe that fascism can be beat. So I wanted to use that example because I think it's timely and it's an approach that works universally. Sure, our methods can change. We don't have to do as Dr. King did in the 50s and the 60s. As Tiff so aptly pointed out, it's the 64th episode for the 1964 Civil Rights Act because we're trying to preserve it. What does preservation, survival, and abundance look like for us in this day and age? And I think that is what we need to wrestle with and get on the same page about.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Brown for her question. Appreciate you listening and tuning in and taking the time to drop a video. I do take a bit of an issue with the framing, and I think it's important for us to know Black folks ain't sitting around letting anything happen. We have never done that, and I can see why some people may think that. And Dr. Brown, you're not the only person I've heard say that. I've heard so many people say that, and I want you to know it is not true. We have never been a docile, lay down and let it happen people. We have always, we damn near freed ourselves in this country. You know, we did free ourselves in this country. And we are a liberated people who will fight to hold and protect that liberation. I know a lot of what you see, the imagery you see on the very antiquated echo chambers of cable news shows like there are two equal forces fighting each other. because so often our truth makes them uncomfortable. So that's not what gets highlighted. Our resistance makes them uncomfortable. That's why you only hear about Nat Turner as if that was the only slave rebellion, when in truth, there were hundreds of people who fought to the death. And so if I can offer some hope, there are people all across this country right now, as we sit here and speak, who are activating, who are organizing, who are trying to figure it out just like you. And I think we have to at least keep that hope in mind. Don't believe their truth about us. What we need in this moment is Black folks who believe in Black folks enough to not believe the bullshit they put out there about us. So, and you all hear us on this podcast. You've watched the work that Angela does. You've seen the work that Andrew does, the work that we do here together to try to make sure that people are informed. And we can't do it all by ourselves. So I think that's an important distinction to make. We are not standing by letting anything happen.
I feel that. I also feel what Amber is pointing out. If I were to compare the Trump administration 1 to the Trump administration 2 and how the country seemed to respond, right now in this moment, the pushback feels pretty vacant, pretty void. And from just my own personal lived experience and conversations, that I've had and just things that I've observed, it feels like this man is browbeating us. We are catching whiplash left and right, trying to keep up with the impact of these executive orders. Angela's breaking news on the recension of one. We saw them step back on the Tuskegee Airmen when they had taken that out of the training curriculum for members of the Air Force and the larger military. And so they're hearing something, and it's feeling like we're revving up to show that we are prepared to reckon with you, and you better be prepared to reckon with us if we can square up. But as a country, when we look at the inauguration and we see corporation after corporation after corporation, people who wrote statements following January 6th, cutting ties, we're done with this. This was a reach too far, are now special guests, and everybody's trekking down to Mar-a-Lago to pay homage, to bend the knee. That is, in my experience, pretty, deflating for the opposition. And my response really is twofold. So one, to our leaders, our national leaders,
who are
folks in Congress, folks in the Senate. I mean, these are elected. I'm speaking very specifically on the elected side of this, which is y'all need to clone Mitch McConnell on the left, because I don't know how it is that when Republicans were out of power, they were somehow able to bring the government, the business to a grinding halt. When the president declared war on the Congress by saying he has appropriation power over them, wherein it's given to the Congress in the Constitution of the United States, I would have said we ain't hearing no more nominees for any position in this government until we come to a reckoning on the fact that Congress is the appropriator by Constitution. Why would we go from calling this man out saying that he is creating an illegal act by trespassing on the rights and the responsibilities of Congress through appropriation, and then in the afternoon hold a confirmation hearing for 3, 4, 5 of his nominees? No, sir. We're bringing the Congress to a halt until you recognize this, because this man is willing to roll the dice and take a chance that the same Supreme Court that made him a king when it comes to prosecution and accountability will be the same Supreme Court that will hold him, that will have his back on this fight with Congress around appropriation. And then to the boycotts, just real quick, and I'll be done. And this is to say, the folks in Montgomery did not want to have to disrupt their lives by walking and carpooling to work, to church, to school, to social activities. You have it. When the boycott was announced, it wasn't agreed upon by all Black people in Montgomery. In fact, we know that through protests, practically 10% of us participated in all of the civil rights demonstrations combined during that period of time.
That's a good flag, Andrew.
So we're not going to be able to get everybody sign on and buy in through ballot or them expressing their opinions. But the damn thing, after a year's time, worked. It was inconveniencing. It was mind-boggling. It was frustrating. It was angering for us. But they stuck to it. There was an announcement. The plan was laid. We said we are not getting back on this back on this bus in that indignity to be suffered until y'all come to heal. And they bought Montgomery to heal. I say that to say I've seen people texting and me and my wife, just reading some of this stuff. Folks saying, well, we can't do this because we got black brands. Well, guess what? We spent a couple of days just looking at how we can get access to those black brands outside of Target. Is there a direct distribution from a provider directly to my house?
Yeah.
And yes, it existed for a good number of them.
Mm-hmm.
Target was a distribution opportunity, but there was also a direct way to get to the vendor to get what it is that you wanted so you could support them. So all I have to say is where there is a will, there is a way. And if it isn't making you uncomfortable, if it isn't disrupting your pattern, if it isn't inconveniencing, mind-boggling, mind-blowing, upsetting, then you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
But these folks are never coming to us with respect until we use our dollars to say, hell no. If you don't respect me enough to employ me and to employ the qualified brothers and sisters who are putting product into this street, then you don't deserve my money, period.
Angela, let me ask you, because Andrew's making this point about our leaders
that.
in Congress. And I have to be honest, I don't know who our leaders are. And Andrew, respectfully, I definitely am not looking at elected officials as our leaders these days, because I think they are there to uphold an institution that, quite frankly, needs to be disrupted. At this point, I think I'm ready to dismantle everything. But Andrew, you do make a legitimate point that so many other people have said. What are Democrats doing? So, Angela, you heard Andrew suggest, well, they need to just halt government. Is that possible? One, do the Democrats have the power to do that? And two, is the Congressional Black Caucus large enough in number where they can halt legislation? Most of them are in the House, so I don't know how they would halt the Senate confirmations. And as we're so disaggregated in Congress, and as the Democratic Party is so disaggregated, you have white people there in the Democratic Party who are, representatives in Congress who want to uphold the institution of white supremacy. So it's not in their interest to bring it to a halt. All the Republicans were united in upholding white supremacy. And on the Democratic side, you don't have that. So what power do Democrats have?
So first, I just want to say we didn't know what our mini pod was going to be yet. I really hope our mini pod today can be the first part of your question, which is, I don't even know who our leaders are.
Okay,
and you
let's
said
do
you're
that.
certainly not looking to to members of Congress. So I'm dying to know who your leaders are. That is a cold tease. So y'all just know. And also, since we're talking about teases, before I answer this question, I'm already off topic. You guys, we have a really great interview with Leslie Jones at the end of this show. Make sure you stay and hear that interview. So the CBC does have the numbers, but more importantly, the Congressional Black Caucus has always had the conscience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what is incumbent upon all of us as Black people right now is to move as if we are the conscience of whatever space we occupy. I love what Andrew said because it's such a good reminder. You guys know my memory sucks. But it was such a good reminder when Andrew said only 10% of the people participated in the boycott practice in Montgomery. I was watching this clip. It was Dr. Claude Anderson recently, and this man was critiquing a clip of Dr. Claude on Breakfast Club. He mentioned that there was a Black man, I believe it was a preacher, I don't want to get this wrong, who offered up buying our own buses during the time of the boycott. And I had never heard this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story. I had never heard this story. Dr. King et al. Didn't want that as a part of the strategy. But what would have happened if this preacher would have just proceeded and said, well, ain't but 10% of y'all, so us 10% over here are going to work on this. We are so much more powerful when we play our role, when we play our position. Everybody not going to go to the boycott and the protest, and that's fine. You still going to reap the benefits. I wish you would participate. But what I'm saying is ultimately your obligation is to find your lane and occupy that well. It is to dominate that. It is the person that writes the best should be doing our demands. The person that articulates should be speaking our demands. The person that can go and negotiate and isn't the rebel riser should be negotiating our demands. And then we have to figure out what next. But when I think about our members, the CBC was never monolithic, and it's definitely not now. You said you don't know who our leaders are, but the main leader we have is a Black man for the first time. We have the first ever Black Democratic leader. And Hakeem Jeffries has, frankly, especially this week, as far as I'm concerned, been killing it. They raised hell about the OMB memo, and they saw rewards. There is a day of action that they're planning the day this podcast drops, where they're engaging all types of organizations with different interests to ensure that this administration knows that it can't run over anybody. Now, I'm going to tell you, the messaging been a little flawed. And I've said this to as many of them as I can. It's not cohesive. And if enough people, whether they're influencers or athletes or they're political commentators, enough people have said they're not clear about what the Democrats' path forward is, I think that they do need to say, you know, this is a president that we didn't expect to see in this role again. We have been on our heels. We were on our heels of Project 2025. We talked about it, but we didn't plan for it. Mm-hmm. Now, here are our plans. Mm-hmm. Here's how we're going to respond. We have Lisa Blunt Rochester. We have Cory Booker. We have Angela Also Brooks. We have Raphael Warnock. And we have people who are allies to them that could stop cloture in the Senate, who could say, no, you're not going to have unanimous consent to proceed with these nominees. A lot of folks have said they could push back on the folks who he keeps trying to nominate who represent, because they wrote the chapters in Project 2025, including his OMB nominee who's not even in yet. That was the interim that caused all that hell yesterday, right? No. So there are things that they can do in that regard as well. We can go on and on about the ways, but I just don't want us to give hope. And we should always remember that our most sacred obligation to these members of Congress is not to expect them to move without our demands. We should be telling them what we want to see, what we need to see, whether it's on our movement building, it's on messaging from them, or it's on legislation that we need them to pass or block.
Angela and Tiff, can I just borrow
really quickly, Andrew, before
second.
You do, really quickly, just so our viewers know, OMB is the Office of Management and Budget. So when Angela references OMB memo, it is the memo announcing the funding freeze. So anytime you hear OMB, that's what that is, Office of Management and
Budget. Correct. Sorry, thank you for that,
And if you
Tiffany.
tune in just yesterday, I said that 92 times.
I just want to give an example of what a member of the United States Senate could do when I said grind his confirmations to a halt. Tommy Tuberville, a U.S. senator, last year refused to confirm any nominees to the military brass, brought it to a screeching halt for months, criticized by Republicans and Democrats alike for the tactic. A single member of the U.S. Senate, which we got, 47, 48 Democrats, whatever, that are in the United States Senate, one of them can grind that body to a complete and total halt. Now, again, I don't think you go nuclear on every fight that we have with this administration. I actually think they ought to have levels. There ought to be levels of urgency. This one, we just getting the people to make calls. This time, we're going and we're putting our best communicators out there, and they're going to bring the message into American people's homes. Third level, when we at, level red, then we are shutting shit down. And what I am terrified of right now is that they have been told by consultants that because Donald Trump is going to do everything and have us riveting every which way, we have to hold our fire for just the right fight. Well, that is nonsense. If Donald Trump is dropping shit every single day that is impacting our lives, why do we leave him the zone to make his message known and nobody is there with a counter? And I don't mean nobody, but I just mean in a coordinated, strong, impactful, and strategic way, getting out there and fighting this man. You meet him right where he is.
Well, I like
it. It doesn't take the right fight. Every fight that is deriving us of our livelihood is the right fight.
I like the idea of doing a mini pod on who are our leaders. I think that's definitely worth a discussion.
Native Land Pod is a production of iHeartRadio in partnership with Reason Choice Media. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.